OU is going on the road to play Iowa State. Ohio State is going up with its potentially biggest matchup to date against Penn State. Going to be a pretty big, tough test for them. And then we have plenty of other matchups that we have to look at. But before we do it, please go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments below. We're going to touch on plenty of recruiting updates. We're going to ask a couple questions, so please jump down in the comments, answer those questions. But most importantly, we're going to cover my Sooners. All right, the Oklahoma Sooners are traveling to Ames, Iowa to play Iowa State this weekend. And this is going to be a fun game, and I think potentially a game that could put Oklahoma on the right path to go out there and win some more games, potentially go undefeated. I think that's what everybody is hoping for. I think ideally, though, you're looking at Oklahoma going 4-1 would be a success for the Sooners. Probably losing to either Baylor or maybe Oklahoma State. I'd like to think that Oklahoma won't lose at home, but there's a potential that they could drop one of those games. So Oklahoma's coming off of a bye week where they previously got the win versus Kansas. They improved to 4-3 after losing 3 straight games to Kansas State, TCU, and getting just annihilated by Texas in the Red River Showdown. But you were without your starting quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. So you get him back in this game, and Oklahoma comes out there, looks impressive on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, you still give up 42 points, but there was an opportunity for Oklahoma to potentially have a bigger blowout than maybe what the score actually showed, especially with the 3 turnovers. You would expect Oklahoma to clean a lot of that up going into the weekend against Iowa State. However, even though Iowa State has one of the worst offensive statistically in the Big 12, this is a good opportunity for the Oklahoma defense to go out there and gain some momentum and gain some confidence, especially in the secondary, as you're going up against a monster of a wide receiver, Xavier Hutchinson, who has kind of really been the focal point for this Iowa State offense. And so for the Sooners to be able to go out there, and I'm not going to say they're going to shut them out, but be able to shut down the Iowa State defense and not allow to happen to you what normally happens. And what I mean by that is allow for you to have quarterbacks look like Heisman candidates and wide receivers to have career games against you, right? For Oklahoma to be able to go out there and prevent that, slow Iowa State down in this game, maybe keep them to their scoring average, I think that's a huge win, and it gives the Oklahoma defense and that secondary a lot of momentum and a lot of confidence as you start to head into November, where you're going to have to play teams that are pass heavy, right? Texas Tech, you've got West Virginia with JT Daniels. I know they're not very good, but they're still going to try to sling that ball around. And then you've got Oklahoma State. They're going to try to do the same thing. And then, Spencer Sanders is going to try to put the work in on the ground. And then you've got Baylor, who I actually think OU should be able to beat handily, but we'll see how that one happens. And we'll cover those games week by week as they come out. But going into November, you want to be able to gain as much momentum as possible. And this game has all of the opportunity to do it, especially for the offense or for the defensive side of the ball. Hunter Deckers, he's a good quarterback. It's just a matter of, can Iowa State really get Xavier Hutchinson going? And then, they've got their running back, Brock, as well. He's had 80 carries, 398 yards this season. So maybe he's able to see some success. I think OU's defensive line and the run game is going to be able to slow down that enough to where maybe he's not going to have as big of a game as what Iowa State would want him to have. My deal is, if Billy Bowman is not able to go in this game, you've got to be able to put Woody Washington out there. He's been proven as your best defensive back outside of Billy Bowman. And so you've got to be able to put him out there on Hutchinson. You have to be able to give your best player an opportunity to guard the other best player on that team. And I think Hutchinson's one of those guys. And so I'm curious to see just how they're going to line that up on the defensive side of the ball. Who's covering Hutchinson? I think that's going to play a big part into kind of what we see on the defensive side and how they're able to stop the Iowa State offense. Now, we've talked about how bad the Iowa State offense is, but let's talk about how good the Iowa State defense is. So they've been really, really good this year. And they've actually improved a lot since last year, where all the all the statistical categories on the defensive side of the ball, they were in the top 25. So to be able to improve on that again in a year where you've lost a lot of offensive production, I think is showing just how good this Iowa State program is and how much momentum they have for their program in terms of growing and developing into a contender for the Big 12 as Oklahoma and Texas start to exit to the SEC. And so they've been one of the best defenses over the past couple of years, and they've been an anchor for this team this year. Iowa State has given Oklahoma problems in the past, right? We know it. They come to Norman, they beat us. They beat us at Jack Trice in 2020. We all know the story about that one, but really, they're going to go out there and they're going to try to shut down the running game for OU. So the running game for Oklahoma has really been a strong point and something that's been kind of consistent for the Sooners. And they're not going to allow very many chunk plays that like we've gotten over the past couple weeks. So you've really got to understand that Eric Gray might not have the best game. I hope he does, but he might not have the best game. Iowa State's going to focus a lot on that. They're going to focus a lot on closing those gaps and trying to not make those mistakes and not giving up those big run plays. Because if you're able to give up those big run plays as we transition into what I think the keys are for Oklahoma to win this game is you've got to establish the passing game early. Whether that's a deep pass to Mims or multiple short passes to just start to get the ball down the field. Because when you do that, the running game will open up. And like we talked about, Iowa State's going to want to shut that down as much as possible, right? Because they're not going to want to be able to have that passing game basically hitting them. So they're going to try to shut Eric Gray and Javonte Barnes down. We got to continue to try to pound the ball and open up the passing game a little bit so that they've got to respect both sides of our game. The additional key here is and this is going to be a key for probably the rest of the season. You've got to be able to protect Dillon Gabriel. So last game against Kansas, you only allowed 1 sack, and you kind of need to replicate that same success or improve on it and just not allow any sacks. Now, you've heard me talk about it for the past couple of weeks, but I think the offensive line for the Sooners has actually been probably one of the stronger points and one of the more consistent pieces on this team. Because they've actually looked pretty well or pretty good, and they've been progressing really well. You've seen them make less mistakes, and you've seen them go out there and protect the quarterback a little bit more. Now, a lot of this has been not put in the spotlight because Dillon Gabriel has been out. And so now that Dillon Gabriel's back, the offensive line really has an opportunity to show us just how much they've improved and if they can keep Dillon Gabriel from getting hurt. Because that's the key. If Dillon Gabriel gets hurt in this game, you start to ask yourself, can OU beat Iowa State? Right? Especially with the kind of defense that Iowa State has. And we all saw it when he went out in that first quarter against TCU. The rest of the game, you struggled. Texas, you go out and lose 49-0. The past 7 quarters when Dillon Gabriel was out there, this offense looked abysmal. And so you've got to be able to go out there. You've got to be able to protect him and keep him from leaving the game. The other thing is, we talked about it earlier, you have to make Hutchinson a non-factor in this game. Allow yourself to build up some confidence and do what you haven't been able to do in the past and shut down a wide receiver that will just wreak havoc on your secondary. This has been OU's mantra for the past several years, right? They go in there, they allow quarterbacks to look like Heisman candidates, and then they allow receivers to just have career games. If you're the Oklahoma Sooners, you cannot let that happen to you. You have to be able to go in there, and you have to be able to make a stop. You have to be able to shut him down, and if you can do that, there's a chance that you hold this Iowa State team to probably under 2 scores. Really, I think OU can potentially, realistically win this game 42-17. The line is currently set at 1.5. I think that's way too low. I think Oklahoma is going to be able to go out there and put up some points. The over-under on this game is 56.5. So definitely I think they're going to hit the over there. Just running through a little bit of statistics here. OU's offense, they're averaging about 471 yards a game. Iowa State's only allowing about 289 yards a game. So I would say if you balance out there, you probably could say OU is going to probably end up somewhere with 400 yards of total offense. I do think they could potentially look to exceed that a little bit as the game wears on. You'll start to see that Iowa State defense break down a little bit. The other big thing here is Oklahoma's got to be able to keep time of possession on this game. You cannot let the Iowa State defense keep bringing your defense back out on the field. At some point or another, you're going to have to be able to keep your defense out on the field. They're only allowing 15.1 points per game while we're allowing 31. It's going to be a huge win if OU can keep Iowa State to their average 22.9 points scored per game or below for Iowa State. It's going to be a huge win. So a lot of good stuff here for this Oklahoma and Iowa State game. A lot of opportunities for Oklahoma to, like I said, gain momentum and show us how they are improving week in, week out. Okay, let's look at this Ohio State versus Penn State game, because this is probably the biggest test for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So last week, you play Iowa, who has one of the best defenses in college football, and historically, week in, week out, has one of the best defenses in college football. And you go out there and you kind of struggle at the beginning. At halftime, I think they only had 26 points. But then you go out in the second half and you just light them up and you win the game 54-10, right? One of the things that I loved about this game for the Ohio State Buckeyes was you shut down the Iowa defense. Or the offense. Not that Iowa has an offense, because we know they don't. But my biggest concern here was if you're Ohio State and you allow more than 14 points to Iowa, we got to start having some questions about your defense. It's kind of the same thing that we have about Oklahoma. So this Ohio State team kind of gave me the questions that I had about Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley was here and we had those explosive offenses. You have an explosive offense, but can your defense go in there and play really well against the teams that it matters against, right? And these are the games where OU would allow like an Iowa team to go out there and put up 24, 31 points, right? And make it close. Ohio State went in there. They took care of business. They shut the Iowa offense down. CJ Stroud didn't have his best game, going 20 of 30 for 286 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 1 interception. But hey, you put up 54 points. You let your receivers eat. You gain some confidence, especially in the first half, when it was a little bit closer and trying to have to bounce back a little bit in the second half. Going into this Penn State game, you're going to, I think, answer a lot of questions that people have for you, because this Ohio State team really kind of hasn't played anybody yet. And I know that people will be like, well, they played Notre Dame. Well, yes, but look at what Notre Dame's been this season. And I look at that Notre Dame game and I think there is some concern maybe, because I don't think Notre Dame's all that great. I know their defense is improving, which, I mean, that's the thing. Ohio State's really only played people with good defenses. Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Rutgers, and Iowa. And yes, I said Rutgers because they are in the top 25 in defense this year. But they really haven't played anybody that can score and put up points on them. And that's something that I think Penn State can do this week, especially with Singleton in the backfield. He has 82 carries for 561 yards this year and 7 touchdowns. And then you've got Sean Clifford, who I feel like has just been at Penn State forever. He's thrown for over 1,400 yards this year, 13 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. I think this Ohio State defense is going to be tested by the Penn State offense. And with this game being in Happy Valley, you have to ask yourself how tough of a contest this is going to be for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State is currently favored by 15. The over-under is 61 on this game. I actually think it's going to, again, be another over. And I think the spread's maybe a little too high. I think actually Ohio State probably wins this game either by 14 or 10 points. So not too high, but I still think it's over what I think the spread's going to be. I still think Ohio State gets the win. The question is, are they going to be able to hold this Penn State offense to a reasonable number? And what are you going to do about Singleton, right? Additionally, Penn State their defense isn't great, but I want to see how your receivers are able to get open in space in this game. And then I want to see your running backs, especially Mayan Williams, right? How are they going to be able to react in this game? I know you've played some better defenses than Penn State's, but when you start to play a team that's a little bit more complete on both sides of the ball, it completely changes the game. And Happy Valley is a hard place to play. Penn State's definitely going to give Ohio State probably everything that they want and more in this game. But let's go ahead and let's look at Notre Dame and Syracuse. So Notre Dame has improved to 4-3 after a not so great start to the season. This is Marcus Freeman's first year as a head coach. His first 3 games as a head coach, he went 0-3. That's dating back to the bowl game loss to Oklahoma State last year. Syracuse is coming into this game 6-1 after dropping a game to Clemson in a game that has questioned a lot of people about Clemson's quarterback situation, but we're not talking about Clemson right now. We're talking about Syracuse. Notre Dame's got a hard stretch coming up. And this Syracuse game, I don't think they were looking at the beginning of the season of being a hard stretch. So you lose to Ohio State at the beginning of the season, 21-10. I feel like if you're Notre Dame, you have some confidence, right? Like, yeah, you lost the game, but you're like, oh, well, we lost to one of the best teams in the country. Like, there's a lot of things that we could build off here with Marcus Freeman. And then the next week you go and lose to Marshall by 5. You bounce back, you beat Cal, you beat North Carolina, a North Carolina team that I think is good, has a good offense. I think here in the next couple of years, you're going to start to see North Carolina bounce up there. And then you beat BYU, which hasn't been the most impressive team of the year, but you beat them by 8 points. BYU at least can cause some problems, but then you go and you lose to Stanford by 2, and then you bounce back against UNLV. I think looking at the beginning of the season, the Syracuse game was potentially a game where Notre Dame looked at it as an easy win, and now you're looking at it and you're going, I don't know, right? Syracuse is averaging 33 points per game. They're holding people to only 294 yards a game, only allowing 15.1 points per game. And if you're looking at it, they've got a quarterback in Schrader who is thrown for over 1,600 yards, 13 touchdowns. He has made a couple of mistakes and throwing for 4 interceptions, but Syracuse has got weapons all over the field. And my question is Notre Dame going to be able to stop both their passing and running game, which I think for Syracuse has been pretty exceptional this year? Clemson was able to do it, and maybe Notre Dame will be able to do it with that defensive-minded head coach, but it's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one. And for Notre Dame, I think you kind of have to pick up a win here because you're going to have to play Clemson next week at home, which you're going to lose that game. I just think Clemson's better than you this year in all aspects, and they're going to be able to beat you. Then you've got Navy, which, I mean, if you've lost to Stanford and Marshall, I definitely think you have a chance to drop that game to Navy, right? So then you've got Boston College at home, which you should win. But then you have to go on the road to USC. There's a good chance that this Notre Dame team could be looking at 5 or 6 losses by the end of the season. And that's definitely not the start that these Notre Dame fans really wanted. And so we'll just have to see how it hands out. Right now, the spread's currently set at -2.5 for Syracuse. I'm actually going to go ahead and pick Syracuse to win this game by 10. I think their offense, especially being at home, is just too much for Notre Dame to handle. I think Notre Dame has got some issues for first-year head coach Marcus Freeman. You just got to give him time. Notre Dame will be back, but Syracuse, they're on a roll. If they can get this win against Notre Dame, their schedule gets pretty easy from here. You just have to go on the road to Pitt. You got Florida State at home, on the road to Wake Forest, and at Boston College. There's a chance that they could end the season at 11-1, or they could end the game in the season at 10-2, which if you're Syracuse, that's probably one of the best seasons that you've had in a while. Okay, let's look at the Oklahoma State versus Kansas State game. But before we do that, if you have not hit the like and subscribe button, please go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot. It helps all of us content creators out. We're not asking for money. We're just asking for a simple subscribe. It helps us get our numbers up there, and it's completely free to you guys. So we're going to give it a couple seconds, and then we'll jump into this Oklahoma State versus Kansas State game. Okay. Oklahoma State versus Kansas State. So Oklahoma State's coming off of, I would say, a disappointing loss. If you're Oklahoma State, I think you kind of at the beginning of the season, you had some worries about what you were going to be in terms of a contender for a Big 12 title and potentially looking at a college football playoff spot. And then you go out there and you lose to TCU in a game where, I felt like you guys should have been able to win. And then you come out and you bounce back against Texas and you win 41-34. But now you're coming to have to play a Kansas State team that's pretty tough. And that's coming from an Oklahoma fan that's had to play Kansas State. And Oklahoma State, I'm sure they're well aware of the problems that Kansas State has been able to cause a team like Oklahoma, where I think they're probably going to come out with the same game plan that they give Oklahoma every single year, right? So one of the things that we see with Kansas State versus Oklahoma is they really try to control the time of possession. And that's something that they're going to try to do in this game. Oklahoma State's offense is explosive, averaging 44 points per game, 466 total yards. Their defense isn't very good. They're allowing 449 yards a game. Kind of looking, this Oklahoma State team is looking more of like an Oklahoma team back when Lincoln Riley was here and we had a lot of those explosive offenses. They're allowing about 303 pass yards and 146 rushing yards. And I think you're probably going to have some of the same problems that Kansas State had or that Oklahoma had against Kansas State, right? Where Adrian Martinez is going to roll out of the pocket, assuming Adrian Martinez plays, and he's able to put that ball down the field a little bit. Or if Will Howard's in this game, I think Will Howard can sling the ball as well. And then additionally, you've got Deuce Vaughn in the backfield that you're going to have to keep an eye on for Kansas State. And then also watch the quarterback because they have mobile quarterbacks. They like to do that, right? They like to want to run the Wildcat. You're going to have to keep an eye on this Kansas State offense and probably keep a spy on the quarterback the entire game just to see what they're going to do. Right now, the line is currently set at 1.5 favorite for Kansas State. I like Kansas State in this one, even though as an Oklahoma fan, we need Kansas State to lose. So even though I like Kansas State in this one, I'm going to pick Oklahoma State to win by 3 just because we need Kansas State to lose in this game and we need Oklahoma State to pick up the W. Okay. Tennessee versus Kentucky. Tennessee's hot. 7-0. You beat Alabama at home. Rocky Top Nation's excited about what's going on out there in Tennessee. And I've got to be honest, they're one of the most exciting college football teams to watch. And I'm really curious to, quite honestly, see Tennessee get the win this week so that they can go undefeated to Georgia. And we could have a undefeated Georgia versus undefeated Tennessee game, just like what we had against Alabama, potentially have another clash of the Titans. This one's simple, guys. Tennessee's favored by 12. I think Tennessee probably wins this game by 21 or more points. I'm not giving Kentucky much of a shot. I know they've got a pretty good defense, only allowing 16 points per game and 295 total yards, but I just think Tennessee's offense is too good, too explosive. I think it's going to be too much for Kentucky to handle. I'm going to pick Tennessee to win this game 52-24 or 31. All right. Ole Miss for Texas versus Texas A&M. And this is a game that I think is starting to gain a lot of traction in terms of intriguing factors into what people think is going to happen. So Texas A&M really needs this game. They really need to be able to win this game because you're not doing so hot. And if you're Jimbo Fisher, your job is on the line here. Like, you're on the hot seat. Now, whether or not the boosters are going to be able to fire you, because when January 3rd hits or January 1st, whenever the buyout goes down, you're still at an $85.6 million number. So you're pretty safe there. But you are on the hot seat. Now, you're going to play an Ole Miss team that's coming off of a loss. They have been undefeated. And, they lost a lot on the offensive side in terms of production. So Texas A&M's defense, let's start here. Texas A&M defense is actually, I felt, not terrible. Like, they've looked good in some spots this year. And Jackson Dart does have a tendency to make mistakes. He's had 11 touchdowns and 7 interceptions this year. If you're Texas A&M and you can go create turnovers in this game, you're going to give yourself a great shot to go win it. But if you can't create the turnovers, Ole Miss is just going to put up the points on you. Ole Miss is averaging about 38 points per game, over 490 yards a game, probably one of the more explosive offenses in college football, not necessarily in scoring a game, but in terms of just yardage. This very, very important that Texas A&M is able to go in there. They're able to make Jackson Dart make mistakes. I'm also curious to see who's going to start at quarterback for A&M this week. Is it going to be Haynes King, or is it going to be Connor Weigman? We saw Haynes King leave the game last week, and we saw Connor Weigman come in. I would expect that if Connor Weigman starts this game and he's getting reps throughout practices this week, he will look better than what he did last week. He's the 5-star quarterback in the 2022 class for Texas A&M, and this class for Texas A&M that just looked tremendous. And this is your first SEC home game of the year, right? So you're finally getting back at home, and you're looking to bounce back. But it's hard for me to be able to want to pick Texas A&M because your offense has just been so bad, right? Jimbo has been so bad at calling this offense, and it's almost like he refuses to give it up to anybody else to be able to help the team here. And I've said it, some of the keys here for Texas A&M is to be able to get some of your skill guys like A-Chain and Evan Stewart the ball more. You got to be able to get them the ball more. And I just don't have confidence that Texas A&M is going to be able to fix these problems this week, especially with all of the suspensions that have been hit with them. I'm going to pick Ole Miss to probably win this game by 10 or 14 points. I don't even think it's close to the spread that they have at -1.5 in favor of Ole Miss. The over-under set at 55. I'd probably take that. I'd probably take the 55 and under. So, but it could be a close one. If Texas A&M gets turnovers, it could be a close one. It could potentially get Texas A&M on the right track. And we got to talk about this because if Ole Miss loses this, or if Texas A&M loses to Ole Miss, you're looking and you're sitting at 3-5, where you're going to have Florida come home. And Florida is definitely capable of beating you, especially if they look good this week against Georgia. You have the game at Auburn after that, right, where you could be sitting at 3-6. Now, Auburn's got their own string of issues. There's no telling what's going to happen in that game. That's a good one that you guys could go out there and grab because who knows if Auburn's going to still have their head coach. People are entering the transfer portal left and right. So it's really hard to tell you what's going to happen against Auburn other than that, hey, Texas A&M might have a good shot to win that game. Against UMass, I expect Texas A&M to win that game. So at that point, you could be sitting at 5-6 heading into an LSU game at home where LSU has looked pretty decent this year. And now you're sitting and you're going, okay, are we going to potentially be 6-6 going to a bowl game? Or are we going to be 5-7, which was the same record as their rival Texas last year, and potentially have a bunch of guys into the transfer portal? I mean, definitely if they end up 4-8, you're looking at a bunch of guys hitting the portal, no matter of a doubt. So this is a very important Texas. It's very important that Texas A&M can try to go in here and try to steal a win from Ole Miss, who they were at one point in the driver's seat for the SEC West champion, but now they're going to have to duke it out with Alabama for that title. So let's talk about another team that's been struggling this year, because we've talked about 3 teams so far: Oklahoma, Notre Dame, and Texas A&M, that I think a lot of people had high hopes for to be able to go in there and have a good season. But let's talk about Miami and Virginia. So Miami's sitting at 3-4. They're in the same situation as Oklahoma, right? Brand new head coach, a lot of turnover on their team, and instead of being 4-3, they're 3-4. They have 2 conference losses. OU has 3, so they're a little bit better there than Oklahoma is. But listen, you're having to go on the field to a Virginia team that, hey, listen, Bryce Armstrong, he passed the ball. He's thrown for over 1,600 yards this year, but they're having an issue putting the ball in the end zone. He's only got 6 touchdowns. He has 9 interceptions, so they do make mistakes. They're only averaging about 17 points per game. Their offense isn't very good outside of that. If you're Miami, you have to be able to go in here and get a win. You have to be able to go in here and beat Virginia, right? You can out-talent everybody here. You have a guy in Tyler Van Dyke who's thrown for over 1,700 yards this year. He can put the ball down the field. Have him put the ball down the field, have him get the ball to his receivers, start him off early, right? Get him hot. And then allow your running game just to come naturally. If you're Mario Cristobal, you need this win, even though you're not hurting in your recruiting class, which we'll get to that here in a second. Right now, Miami's favored by 2.5 in this game. I like that. I'm going to pick Miami to win by 7 points against Virginia. I think it's a win that they need. It's a win that they will get, and it's going to set them on the right track. Okay, that's going to be it for the games that we're calling this week. And we got to talk about some recruiting stuff because there's been quite a few interesting things that are happening in the recruiting world, specifically with this. Miami, even as bad as they are, have now landed 2 of the top 10 recruits in the 2023 recruiting class. So I'm going to say this. I know, especially OU fans are the worst with this. You get so wound up because your team doesn't play well and you're worried about a recruit leaving the school. Yet look at Miami, look at how bad they are, and look at how good their recruiting class is. Right now, Miami is sitting at number 8 overall in the 247 rankings, and you have 2 of the top 10 5-stars, or 2 of the top 10 players overall in this class. You have Francis, I'm going to totally butcher his last name, so I apologize, Moigoa, and then you have the Cormani McLean, who just shocked everybody by committing to the University of Miami, which we're gonna get to Cormani here in a second. Miami has a huge shot to continue this with Samson Okunololoa, and then they're in the running for several other guys. So we'll see how Miami goes and trends to finish this. But again, for fans that think that wins and losses are everything and that's what players make their decisions on, not necessarily, right? I think it does play some factor, but it's not the overall indecision of why a player decides to go to a school. Because ultimately, if the school is not performing well, you know you can probably hit the field day one. So Desmond Ricks decided to reclassify to this class. There is a chance that they could try to land him as well. I don't think Florida State is any longer in the driver's seat here, right? I think it's primarily going to come down between Bama, Miami, Oklahoma, LSU, in Florida, right? I think those are probably going to be your main players for Desmond Ricks in this class. We'll see where he lands. We'll see if Miami can try to go grab him. But let's talk about Cormani McLean because Lakeland, Florida is a place where historically Florida has been able to go in there and just pretty much take whoever they want. And to be able to go in there and lose the number 2 player overall in this class, number 1 cornerback, that's a pretty big loss for Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. And Cormani McLean, he's going to make a day 1 impact for the Miami Hurricanes. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to be able to bring. Glad he did not go to Alabama, where I think a lot of people expected him to go. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. I don't really have any new recruiting updates for OU. We got Caden McDonald's commitment coming up on the 31st. So stay tuned for that one and what we expect to see there. We talked about Anthony Evans. He ain't going anywhere. He's just wanting to take his mom to a game, and I commend him for that. Listen, guys, Jackson Arnold, Samuel Omosigo, Derek LeBlanc, they've got this class going. They've got it going in the right direction. Trust the process, trust the staff, and I still think OU is probably going to end up with the top 3 class. There's a lot of guys that they're going out for. One of those guys being Samson Okunololoa, who's the 5-star offensive tackle that Miami's also trying to go out there and get. So if you can land him, if you can land David Hicks, and then you can flip Peyton Bowen, OU's looking pretty good in this class, right? You're looking pretty good. And I think they're going to be okay going forward. Nothing I think OU needs to be too concerned about there. Okay, if you listen to this on any of the major podcast platforms, Apple, Google, or Spotify, please go ahead, give me 5 stars, leave me a review. Let me know what you guys like or don't like about the show. Additionally, I want to leave you guys with this question that we are going to answer next week. Please go ahead and drop it down in the comments. Who do you think is going to have the better head coaching career at the current school they're at now? Right? Is it going to be Mario Cristobal or is it going to be Brent Venables at Oklahoma? Reason being is they're both pretty close and similar to their records, and they're both at pretty high-profile schools. And I just think it's probably a good, I want to go ahead and put this out there, a good comparison of who's going to be able to do better. I personally think it's going to be Brent Venables, but I want to hear from you guys. Is it going to be Brent Venables, or is it going to be the head coach, Mario Cristobal, for the Miami Hurricanes? But until then, we will see you guys on Sunday to recap week 9.